In a ballroom full of the city's elite, every eye is on the glamorous guests except one janitor, unnoticed in his blue uniform. But tonight, when the concert pianist collapses, he's about to do something no one ever expected, something that will leave the CEO and every guest utterly speechless. At the heart of this opulent universe, its creator and unforgiving ruler, Miss Evelyn Reed, held court. She was not merely a woman. She was a force of nature carved from raw ambition and polished to a terrifying sheen. Her black sequined dress clung to her like a second skin, less an outfit and more a suit of exquisitely tailored armor. She moved through the party not with the warmth of a host, but with the chilling precision of a predator scanning her territory for weakness. Her eyes, sharp and analytical, missed nothing. She stopped a young waiter, his tray laden with intricate canapes. "These crab puffs," she said, her voice a low, controlled blade that cut through the surrounding chatter, "are 5 degrees too cool. The pastry has lost its crispness." She didn't wait for an explanation. "Take them all back. Tell Chef Antoine my 5-figure check was for perfection, not for good enough." The young man's face turned ashen. He mumbled a terrified, "Yes, Ms. Reed," and practically fled toward the kitchens, his retreat an admission of her absolute power. She pivoted, her gaze landing on her perpetually anxious assistant, Clara, who was clutching a tablet as if it were a life raft. "Clara, the lighting on the West Terrace is far too dim. It looks funereal. People are supposed to be mingling, not mourning. Do I have to think of absolutely everything?" "No, Ms. Reed. Of course not. I'll have it adjusted right away," Clara stammered, her fingers fumbling with the controls on her tablet, her own anxiety a testament to Evelyn's demanding nature. This was Evelyn's world, a meticulously curated ecosystem where every person, every object, was ruthlessly categorized, asset or liability. Her guests, with their talk of mergers, acquisitions, and summers in the Hamptons, were assets. A lukewarm canapé was a liability. A dimly lit terrace was a liability. For Evelyn, this party wasn't a celebration. It was the annual shareholder meeting for her own social standing, and she was the unforgiving CEO of herself. Her guests, in turn, were players in the same game. Their laughter, though loud, was brittle. Their compliments were transactional, offered like currency in expectation of a return. They spoke of buying yachts and selling companies with the same detached tone, their connections as carefully managed as their stock portfolios. And through it all, Arthur Pendelton continued his silent, invisible patrol. He was the cleanup crew for a world that never admitted to making a mess. He retrieved a fallen cocktail olive from the gleaming floor near a group of laughing investors, his movements so discreet they went entirely unnoticed. One of them, a man with a booming voice and a garish watch, gestured emphatically while telling a story, spilling a few drops of his 25-year-old scotch on the white marble. He didn't notice. His friends didn't notice, but Arthur did. He saw everything. He waited for the group to shift their weight, for their attention to be captured by a passing colleague. Then he moved in. With a soft cloth, he erased the small, sticky mess, his movements quiet, efficient, and final. He was a ghost in a machine of excess, his purpose to maintain the illusion of flawlessness. He straightened a gilded chair, wiped an invisible fingerprint from a glass tabletop, and collected discarded napkins, his presence less intrusive than a breath of air. He was used to their obliviousness. He preferred it. The silence gave him time to see the things the powerful people were too busy performing to notice. The nervous tic of a junior executive desperate to impress, the forced, weary smile of a spouse who would rather be anywhere else, the profound, unshakable loneliness in the eyes of a billionaire surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Arthur saw the hairline cracks in the flawless facade because his job, after all, was to deal with what was broken, discarded, and overlooked. The evening's rhythm was planned with military precision, cocktails and mingling until 8:45 p.m., opening remarks by the CEO at 9 p.m., then the main event, the true centerpiece of the night, a private performance by Julian Vance. He was a celebrated concert pianist, a prodigy flown in from New York at immense expense. His performance on the company's brand new 9-foot Fazioli concert grand piano, an instrument fabled for its bell-like tone and purchased specifically for this occasion, was meant to be the dazzling jewel in the gala's crown. At 8:52 p.m., just 8 minutes before Evelyn was scheduled to speak, the meticulously planned symphony of the evening hit a screeching, dissonant halt. Clara, her face drained of all color, was seen scurrying through the dense crowd, moving like a frantic salmon, swimming against a powerful current of couture and cologne. She reached Evelyn's side, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts that fogged the air. "Ms. Reed," she whispered, her voice trembling so hard it was barely audible. "There is a major problem." Evelyn turned slowly, a queen interrupted. Her eyes narrowed into slits of ice. "Clara, for your sake, I truly hope this isn't about the vintage of the Dom Perignon." "It's Julian Vance," Clara managed to say, her voice cracking under the strain. "His agent just called. He was in the car, on his way here. He had some kind of collapse. The agent said a severe panic attack. The paramedics are with him now. He's not coming." For 5 full seconds, Evelyn Reed did not move. She stood perfectly still, her charming host's smile hardening into a mask of cold disbelief. Then, the mask didn't just crack, it vaporized. A cold, quiet fury began to radiate from her, an almost visible aura of rage. "Get his agent on the phone," she hissed, her voice dangerously low. "Tell him I will double the performance fee, triple it. I don't care. Get his client a doctor and a sedative and get him here. This is not optional. This is an order." "His agent says it's impossible, Ms. Reed. He said Mr. Vance is incapacitated." Evelyn's composure finally broke. She grabbed Clara's arm, her fingers digging into the flesh. "Listen to me, and listen carefully. Nothing is impossible. Do you see them?" She gestured with her head toward a cluster of guests that included journalists from the city's top society pages. "The press is here. Do you understand what a silent piano in the middle of my event means? It is a monument to failure. My failure. Now, find me another pianist. Now." "I've tried," Clara pleaded, her eyes welling with tears she knew she was forbidden to shed. "It's Saturday night. The Philharmonic is playing tonight. There is no one of his caliber available on 30 minutes' notice in the entire city." "Solutions, Clara. I pay you for solutions, not for a catalog of your failures." Evelyn released her arm with a shove, pacing back and forth in a tight, agitated circle. She looked at the grand piano, sitting under a soft, solitary spotlight on its raised dais. It was a magnificent instrument, a work of art in polished ebony and ivory. But right now it was a 10-ton accusation, an emblem of her perfect evening, now broken and silent. The ambient hum of the room was changing. The whispers were no longer about stock tips and summer homes. They were shifting to gossip. "What's the delay?" "I heard the pianist canceled." The word failure hung in the air, a toxic perfume she could almost taste. Evelyn could feel the stares of her rivals, their feigned expressions of sympathy, a thin mask for their predatory, triumphant satisfaction. Her perfect night was unraveling, thread by humiliating thread. Evelyn's agitated pacing carried her toward the dais, her high heels clicking on the marble floor like angry, irregular heartbeats. Her eyes were locked on the silent, mocking piano. It was the symbol of her impending humiliation. Then, her gaze snagged on something in her periphery, something so mundane it was almost an affront. It was Arthur. He was quietly, methodically refastening the hook on a velvet rope that had come loose from its stanchion, just doing his job, utterly oblivious to the high-stakes crisis unfolding mere feet away. In that moment, all of Evelyn's roiling frustration, her abject humiliation, and her white-hot rage coalesced and fixated on a single target. The sight of the calm, ordinary, entirely unremarkable janitor was a lit match on a gallon of gasoline. He was so placid while her world was collapsing. She stopped pacing. A cruel, calculating smile touched her lips. It was a terrible smile born of desperation and malice. She turned back to the room, raising her voice to command attention. "Well, everyone," she announced, her voice dripping with a theatrical, venomous sarcasm that silenced the whispers. "It seems our artist for the evening has proven to be unavailable. What shall we do with this magnificent piano?" She let the question hang in the air for a pregnant moment, building the drama before turning theatrically towards the unsuspecting Arthur. "Perhaps our friend here can fill in." A ripple of confused, then amused, laughter spread through the room. They understood the joke. The powerful, humiliated CEO mocking the lowly janitor to deflect from her own failure. It was cruel, uncomfortable theater, and they were a captive audience. Arthur looked up, startled by the sudden, crushing weight of 200 pairs of eyes. He saw Evelyn Reed staring directly at him, her eyes glittering with a strange, feverish light. One moment he was fixing a rope. The next, he was the unwilling star of a play he didn't understand, its sole purpose, his own humiliation. "I'm quite serious," Evelyn said, striding towards him, each step an act of aggression. The guests watched, enthralled by the bizarre spectacle. "You're always around, keeping things in perfect order. Surely a man of such diligence must have some hidden talents." She stopped directly in front of him, invading his personal space, looking down her nose at him. "Tell me," she purred, "can you play this piano?" Arthur was frozen, a deer in the headlights of her contempt. All he could manage was a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "No?" Evelyn pressed, clearly enjoying the power of the moment, of holding this man's dignity in her hands. "A shame. How about some Chopin? A little nocturne, perhaps?" She gestured grandly toward the silent piano. "Let's make this interesting, shall we? A bit of entertainment." She turned her voice up so everyone could hear the absurd wager. "If you can sit down at that piano right now and play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, I will give you a bonus so large you can buy this very piano for yourself." The room erupted in loud, braying, unrestrained laughter. The offer was preposterous, the ultimate act of condescension. It was a public declaration. "You are nothing. You are a joke. You exist for my amusement." Arthur stood there, feeling stripped bare, his face burning under the assault of their collective ridicule. Every instinct screamed at him to apologize, to back away, to disappear back into the invisibility he had cultivated for years. But then he looked past Evelyn's smug, triumphant face, and his eyes settled on the piano, the Fazioli. To him, it wasn't just an object of Evelyn's status or a prop in her cruel joke. It was a language he had once spoken fluently. It was an old, beautiful country from which he had exiled himself. He thought of his wife, Eleanor, 30 years gone now. He could see her so clearly, sitting in their small living room, her head tilted as she listened to him play that very piece on their old, out-of-tune upright. "You don't just play the notes, Arthur," she used to say, her voice softer than the music itself. "You play the spaces in between." That was another lifetime. He had buried that man, the man who could play, under 3 decades of grief and silence. The waves of laughter washed over him, and something deep inside him that had been dormant for 30 years finally broke. Or maybe it was pieced back together. The part of him that knew the feel of polished ivory under his fingertips, that understood the architecture of a chord, began to stir. A flicker of defiance, small but intensely bright, ignited in his chest. He lifted his head and looked Evelyn Reed right in the eye. He was not looking at her as a servant looks at a master, but as an equal. His voice was a quiet whisper, yet it possessed a strange authority that cut through the lingering laughter like a razor. I suppose I could try." The laughter sputtered out, replaced by a wave of confused murmurs. He agreed. Was this part of the joke? Was he mad? Arthur took one hesitant step, then another. The sound of his thick-soled rubber work boots on the polished marble was a jarring, profane intrusion in this temple of wealth. He walked directly past the stunned CEO and up the 2 short steps to the dais. Every eye in the room followed him. They weren't laughing anymore. They were watching, baffled and morbidly curious, all of them thinking the same thing. What on earth is he doing? Arthur reached the piano and stood before it for a moment, as if greeting an old friend. He sat down. The plush, supple leather of the concert bench felt alien and luxurious against the coarse wool of his janitor's uniform. For a long, silent moment, he just closed his eyes and took a single deep breath, shutting out the 200 pairs of eyes staring at his back. He gently, reverently, lifted the polished fallboard, revealing the 88 pristine, immaculate keys. He placed his hands over them. They were not the delicate, manicured hands of a concert pianist like Julian Vance. They were the hands of a working man, wide and calloused, with a small, faded scar near his right thumb from a broken cleaning machine. A lifetime of manual labor was written in the lines on his palms and the thickness of his fingers. But as they hovered over the ivory and ebony, they seemed to remember a different kind of work, a different kind of language. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute, a heavy, expectant void. Even the clinking of ice in glasses had ceased. Evelyn stood frozen near the stage, her arms crossed defensively, the ghost of a smirk still lingering on her lips, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of profound uncertainty. "Then," he began, "the first note of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Opus 9, number 2, hung in the air. It was pure, clear, and perfect. Then a second, and a third. The opening phrase was hesitant, almost shy, as if his fingers were reacquainting themselves with an old, forgotten love. Okay, the guests thought collectively, a silent sigh of relief and mild disappointment. The janitor knows the tune. He can pick out a melody, a cute party trick. But then, everything changed. After the first few tentative bars, something shifted in Arthur. His back straightened. His shoulders, once hunched from years of mopping floors, relaxed and fell into the posture of a seasoned performer. His hands, which had seemed so clumsy and out of place, came alive. The simple, familiar melody blossomed into something impossibly complex, rich, and beautiful. He wasn't just playing the notes on the page, he was inhabiting them, transforming them. His left hand flowed over the keys in fluid, rolling arpeggios, a powerful river of sound that cradled and carried the delicate melody played by his right. The music that filled the room wasn't just Chopin's. It was the sound of 30 years of accumulated silence shattering into a million brilliant pieces. It was the color of his grief for Eleanor, the texture of his lonely nights, the quiet dignity of his hidden pride, the sharp ache of his unspoken pain. It all poured out of him, channeled through his calloused fingertips and into the very soul of the magnificent Fazioli piano, which seemed to sing for him as it would for no other. Evelyn Reed's face was a canvas of collapsing emotions. The smug smirk was gone, melted away, and replaced by slack-jawed, wide-eyed astonishment. Her carefully constructed arrogance was being dismantled, note by glorious, heart-wrenching note. She brought a hand to her mouth as if to physically stop a gasp from escaping. The cynical investor who had spilled his scotch stood completely still, his glass held halfway to his lips, his boisterous personality silenced. Clara, the terrified assistant, was openly weeping, tears of awe streaming down her face, not from fear, but from the overwhelming, unexpected beauty of the moment. The music swelled to its passionate climax, a cascade of brilliant sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the ballroom before receding into its final, delicate, wistful passage. The last notes fell like soft tears, ending on a single, final chord that hung in the air, shimmering with all the emotion he had poured into it. Then, silence. A silence more profound, more complete than any that had come before. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, no one moved. No one breathed. Finally, the old lonely billionaire, the one Arthur had noticed earlier, slowly, unsteadily, got to his feet and began to clap. Not politely, but with genuine force. Then another person stood. And another, and within seconds, the entire room was on its feet. The applause wasn't polite or reserved. It was a roar, a thunderous, grateful, cathartic standing ovation that washed over the man on the stage. Amidst the cheers and applause, a woman's voice, trembling with emotion, cut through the noise. It was the question burning on everyone's mind. "My God! Who are you? Where did you learn to play like that?" Arthur slowly turned on the bench, his face serene. He looked out at the sea of faces, these powerful people who now stared at him not as a janitor, but as if he were a visiting god. His gaze traveled past them all and landed finally on Evelyn Reed. His eyes were clear, his dignity absolute and unshakable. He spoke, his voice calm and steady, easily carrying through the now quieting room. "I used to be a professor," he said. He paused, letting the word hang in the air. "I taught piano at Juilliard." Juilliard. The name hung in the air, as resonant and powerful as the final chord he had played. A janitor, a Juilliard professor. The two incompatible ideas waged war in the minds of the astonished guests. They began to cluster in small, stunned groups, speaking in hushed, reverent tones. "Did you hear him?" a woman whispered, clutching her husband's arm. "Juilliard, can you possibly believe it?" Another man, a notorious corporate raider, shook his head slowly. "I saw Vance last year at Carnegie Hall. This was better. This was real. The entire social fabric of the evening had been irrevocably rewoven. The talk was no longer of business deals or market trends. It was of the quiet man in the blue uniform and the miracle they had just witnessed. For Evelyn Reed, the world had been knocked completely off its axis. Her carefully built reality, founded on a rigid hierarchy of status, wealth, and power, had been exposed as a fragile house of cards. The man who cleaned her toilets, the man she had tried to publicly humiliate, possessed a gift so profound she couldn't have bought it for $1 billion. A deep, burning shame, hot and unfamiliar, washed over her. He hadn't just played the piano, he had held up a mirror to her soul, and she was horrified and disgusted by the reflection. Slowly, hesitantly, she began to walk towards the dais. The guests, sensing the shift, parted for her like the Red Sea. She was not the imperious, commanding CEO now. Her shoulders were slumped, her perfect posture gone. She looked smaller, diminished. She stopped at the foot of the stage, looking up at him. The power dynamic had been so completely and irrevocably inverted. He was on stage in the warm spotlight. She was in the relative darkness below, looking up. She started, but her voice, usually so commanding, was uncharacteristically small and fragile. I don't know what to say. That was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard in my life. She looked him directly in the eye, and for the very first time, she truly saw him, not the uniform, not the job title, but the man. And I am so sorry. For my arrogance, for what I said, for not seeing you. The apology wasn't a social nicety, it was a raw, painful confession. Arthur looked down at this powerful woman, now utterly vulnerable before him. He saw no triumph in his eyes, only a deep, quiet, and weary acceptance. He gave a small, slow nod, a gesture that acknowledged not just her apology, but the pain that had prompted it. A new idea, a solution, began to form in Evelyn's mind. "My daughter," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of its old energy. "She's 10. She takes piano lessons from the best teacher in the city, but she has no passion for it. She says the music is just dots on a page. She doesn't feel it." Evelyn's mind was clicking back into its familiar problem-solving mode, but now with a new, critical variable added to the equation: respect. "I would pay you anything," she said, the words tumbling out. "Triple what I pay my top executives. Leave this job. Today. Be our company's official music director, an artist in residence, a consultant, anything you want. Name your price." Arthur gently raised a hand, a gesture that was both kind and final. "Thank you, Miss Reed. That's a very generous offer. But that life, the recitals, the applause, it's behind me now." He looked down at his own hands, resting on his knees. "I lost the person I used to play for. When my Eleanor was gone, the music went quiet too. The concert halls just felt empty. I chose this life. I chose the quiet." Evelyn's face fell. She had hoped to make it right with a contract, a title, a check, the only tools she truly understood. "But," Arthur continued, and his gaze softened, a flicker of the old professor returning to his eyes. "Perhaps I could speak with your daughter, sometime. Not as a teacher, and not for a fee." He looked directly at Evelyn, ensuring she understood the distinction. "Just to talk. To help her find the story she wants to tell with the music. The music isn't in the notes, Ms. Reed. It was never in the notes. It's in the spaces in between. It was an offer of genuine connection, not a transaction, a gift of mentorship, not a service for purchase. It was something far more valuable than any bonus she could offer." Overwhelmed, Evelyn simply nodded, a single, unexpected tear escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. "Just, thank you." She instinctively reached out her hand and he took it. Her hand was smooth, delicate, and manicured. His was rough, calloused, and strong. It was no longer the handshake of a CEO and a janitor. It was a handshake between two people who had, against all odds, finally and truly seen each other. True value is so often hidden in plain sight, tucked away behind a uniform, a job title, or a preconceived notion we refuse to question. The most beautiful music, the most profound wisdom, can come from the most unexpected places, just waiting for a single moment to be heard. The story of Arthur Pendelton is a reminder that every single person we pass by contains a universe of experience, talent, heartbreak, and joy. We just have to be willing to look past the surface, and more importantly, to listen. If this story reminds you of the power of looking deeper, share it with someone who might need to hear it. What other hidden talents do you think are all around us, just waiting for the right moment to be discovered? Let us know your thoughts.